Okay, so the next item is on the 3 questions that we want to ask. A couple of ways of handling it. We could start with some general discussion right now, and I'm afraid that we're all going to wordsmith these questions. So I would recommend we have an initial discussion and then we designate 2 board members to take that feedback and craft the 3 questions.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
So what is the process right now? Are we brainstorming potential questions, or are you really trying to get us to 3 questions right now?
Three topics. He's trying to get us to 3 topics.
I'm sorry, I heard questions. Okay, you're trying to get us to 3 topics. Are we brainstorming, or are we just gonna, what are we doing?
Yes, let's do this. Let's each member say, what would my 3 questions be?
I'm sorry, is it topics or questions?
Topics, either one. If we haven't formulated the actual question in our mind, we can just say what the topic is. And then the 2 board members who volunteer to write the question can follow up with each member. Anybody ready? Director Dobbins, what do you want to ask?
Well, actually, the specific questions, frankly, I defer to somebody.
How about topics? Anything?
What's that?
Do you have any topics that you would like to touch
Maybe
on?
in general.
Okay.
I mean, do we want something where it's a, do they know what we're doing, or is it kind of where they're going? So do I need like a historian to say, well, school board is at X, Y, and Z, and that person's most qualified? I mean, let's leave it open-ended. I'm not.
Director London?
So I put a lot of thought into the questions that went into the questionnaire, and most of the questions that I would ask are in the questionnaire. The things that are still outstanding for me about these candidates, having reviewed all of their applications, is do they intend to run for this seat next year? How many school board meetings have they actually attended in the past 3 years? What I'm interested in getting at is, what is their level of commitment to serving the students of Oakland as opposed to pursuing their own personal gain and or using this as a stepping stone to greater political office?
Okay. Director Torres, do you have any?
Based on what Director London just said, I think that is also one of my biggest concerns, is that the speaker who addressed us, I don't remember the name, she, to me, hit it right on the nail with regard to the biggest issue that's needing to be addressed is the inequity, the inconsistency that we see. So with regard to the person's lifelong record, it would speak for itself, and that would, to me, make it easy to decipher if this were, in fact, just a stepping stone, or this is someone's life work as far as being from the community or children in the community, career path, what have you, that speaks to the issue of they're here, they're probably going to run, they want to stay on another term because it's such a short amount of time to finish out Gary Yee's position. So I think that that's what I really want to get at as well, is that understanding of what has been their commitment thus far to the entire district, obviously, because it's such a, like all of them, there's such a diversity in District 4 as well, going from Montclair all the way down into High Street, Fruitvale area on the edge there. And so I definitely want to know what it is that they've done thus far.
Okay. Director Harris?
Sure. I would definitely like to hear their thoughts on budget. So a question that kind of gets at budget, their understanding of it. What are the top priorities for them in District 4 and the district-wide? Where do you stand on charters? Where do you stand on local control funding, for that matter? But it would be good to, so when I say budget, you know, because we're going through this LCFF, how up to speed are they on state budget, federal budget, Title I, et cetera? So some kind of question that encompasses that. What is your vision around teaching and learning? And the role that classroom teachers and principals play in developing young students. I think those are some key things that I would ask.
Okay. Vice President Hinton-Hodge?
Well, you always get me at process. I'm gonna bring it. I mean, I have real clear questions in terms of some of the topical things I think they come out of our strategic plan in a lot of ways of like, how has this person engaged with institutional change or institutional, culture shifts? How comfortable are they with really addressing institutional barriers, institutional racism that we've kind of named and called out? So where do you sit with doing that type of work? I really want to know whether or not they have the ability to kind of facilitate conversations, and I think having a sense of facilitative leadership, right? And then thinking about how they work as a part of a team. So those are kind of my questions. I'd actually like to, I'd like to know from them, because I think a lot of what we, local funding or inequities, I mean, some of these things we know we're chipping away at and we're pushing at. And yet there's some things that are kind of always, I don't know, either under the surface. And I'd like to get some insight from someone who's saying that they actually want to step into this particular position in a temporary kind of situation. What are they actually, what do they see from that kind of objective standpoint? But to start at this, and I don't know, we haven't heard your questions, but I have a serious issue right now with who we are as a team kind of walking into this process. And I definitely shared this with you during executive council conversations around being really clear where we agree and disagree as a team around this process. Because for me, there's some, are we going to walk with a level of bias because someone says that they're interested in doing public service and they want to run for election? And that feels pretty hypocritical to me as a person who sits with people who've run a term, at least one, and run 2 to 3 terms. So, I mean, we're all pretty political, even though we want to say or act like we're not political. And so I want to be really clear of, if you say you want to run another term, is that a vote against you? And so being, again, we can agree to disagree around that, but I don't think that we've had those conversations really around, besides the job description that's very clear and dictated as to what a board member qualifications are. Are we talking about someone that's going to fill the shoes of Gary Yee? Are we talking about someone that's going to actually help us hold the course until the next election, is going to help us hold the course through what I would identify as 3 or 4 really big items over the next year that we may or may not agree on? So I feel like we haven't delved very deeply into that. And so I just want to be mindful of some level of like where the bias stands.
Director London?
I'm sorry, Director President Kawakushima, I know you haven't had a chance to speak yet. I should have prefaced my earlier remarks with, this is where I was talking about, did we want to talk, we haven't had the conversation yet about what we're looking for in a candidate, because in my mind, there's a gap, because Director Yee, while he will be rejoining us on the dais as the acting superintendent, has for many years carried a huge amount of history and knowledge and understanding of education policy, funding, all the things that make this district tick. And so, and I'm very mindful that we have an election coming up next year. So the question is, do we want, and I'll just state it, do we want to use this appointment as a way to bring in an incumbent someone who will then run next year as an incumbent, or do we want to use this appointment as a way to bring in someone who can hit the ground running, understands fairly well the issues and the nuances and the intricacies, and doesn't need a primer on all the alphabet soup like I did for 2 years when I started, and is able to just kind of have us keep on ticking along, is already understands and is bought into the strategic plan. That to me is why I was asking that question about, because I guess in my mind, I have a preference for bringing in someone who doesn't necessarily want to run, but can hit the ground running and can help us continue on with our vision. And then next year, in 16 months, the voters will decide who is actually going to fill that seat. And the campaigning can begin tonight. It appears that we have many people who are interested. I feel like we're very lucky that, and it's, I think, a tribute to the work of this board that we have so many people who are interested in joining us up here. So that is the preface that I should have offered.
Okay, so my 2 cents on questions is my questions are based on what my criteria is on selecting one of the applicants. My priority is identifying an applicant who can in fact hit the ground running here on the board, both in the public arena as well as in our closed sessions, in our day-to-day interactions with developing and evaluating, developing policy, budgets, what have you, evaluating their impact, and just being able to help us 6 members as a 7-member body to move forward the district's work. So I have actually 5 questions, but I'm going to throw out the 3 questions that I think are pertinent for the next 18 months related to the term of this person. So first, I think I want to know, hopefully in good detail, their understanding and interpretation of what the district's strategic plan means to them. And not as a feel-good thing, but now in your seat as a school board member, what is your interpretation of this document? Then, based on that, what is, and the question is not well formulated, so it's sort of a topical thing, but we will be searching and selecting a permanent superintendent. So how does your understanding of that plan fit into determining your criteria for selecting a permanent superintendent? And then the third question is that we are in the midst of contract negotiations with the teachers union. The core business of the school district is teaching. Again, your understanding of the strategic plan, how does contract negotiations, how does a teacher's contract have any bearing on successfully implementing the strategic plan? Those are my 3. I also had questions about money, things like that, but 3 questions, so stick with those 2. Money's always going to be a problem. Okay, Vice President Hodge?
Yeah, when I was alluding to I'm personally not necessarily looking for anyone to kind of champion any new work, just my opinion at this particular point, because I think kind of the big ticket issues that we have on the table are contract negotiations. While we're moving forward with something right now, it's not just even our teachers that we're talking about, but it's across the board, all of our employees, and to think about how we think about all of those employees in service to creating full-service community schools. To the superintendent search, very directly, I'm looking for someone that's going to help us hold it together around that. And then we also are doing, and we'll be in the midst of significant decision-making around assets that we have and facilities that we have. And we'll be walking down a road that we haven't ever really walked down before, based on some legislation that allows us to look at some things, based on trying to get further and further more independent, and not just this notion of local control, really get to local control. So how we deal with assets 1025, to be really exact. And then thirdly, measure J, which speaks to facilities, but for me, really is going to speak to the technology piece, right? That's that part, and the nutrition and the health piece, and how those things are going to impact student achievement. So, you know what I mean? So those are going to be things that we're going to be looking at, thinking through, helping our superintendent to operationalize in some kind of way. So those are kind of my specific things that I want to know what they think about.
Okay, so we have enough to work on. I have a list, it looks like about 20-plus topics. Anybody wish to, there are two members that wish to volunteer? Okay, Director Torres? Okay. Okay? Yes. Have to write it up. Okay, and then if you have any questions, ask, board members to clarify their statements and things like that. So we need to narrow this down to 3 questions. Yep, okay.